10 years since Paris. The impacts are here. The clock is ticking. Major economies are steering towards a green and digital transformation. The question is no longer why we must do this, but how we can best do it together. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.
And I'm Jeremy Wilks at Euronews in Brussels.
Both China and Europe agree that we're aiming for a sustainable future.
We can also expect plenty of competition on the road to a greener planet too.
Joined by experts on the front lines, CGTN and Euronews bring you a global brainstorm on how the race to deploy clean technology will unfold. Hello and welcome to a special joint production from CGTN and Euronews asking who will lead the next wave of green growth. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.
And I'm Jeremy Wilks at Euronews in Brussels. It's great to be with you. In this programme, we're debating how the race to deploy clean technology will unfold.
Both China and Europe agree that we're aiming for a sustainable future. We need to complete the energy transition. And we have to build resilience in the face of climate change.
To meet those goals, we need the right mix of technologies, legislation and cooperation. And in today's world, we can also expect plenty of competition on the road to a greener planet too.
Now, to debate the question of who will lead the next wave of green growth, I'd like to welcome our four panelists. We have Professor Wu Changhua, President of Global Climate Academy and Chair of the Governing Council of Asia-Pacific Water Forum.
And I'd also like to welcome Karine Vernier, the CEO of InnoEnergy in France.
And another guest from China, Dr. Ma Jun, is Director of the Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs.
And I'd like to welcome Ben Honan, Investment Lead for the Climate Kick, an EU community working on climate innovation. And I'd like to start with an icebreaker question to you, Ben. Is there one green technology that you're particularly excited about today?
It's an evolving market and brings to life some of the advantages that we can get out of renewable energy. And so we're quite excited about how that will evolve over the coming years.
Professor Wu, the same question. What green technology excites you the most?
Well, at this very moment, I'm looking into the AI-enabled industrial decarbonization, which is a fascinating developing at this moment, particularly for China context. On one side, we do need to decarbonize the industrial emissions as much as possible. But in the meantime, now we have really fast growing AI capability. So combining the two together is very exciting to see what's going to be unfolding.
Karine, can I come to you with that question? What are you excited about at the moment?
It's extremely difficult to give you just one technology. I followed by two colleagues. We are looking a lot on storage. We are looking a lot on hydrogen, artificial intelligence also. So it's a mix of multiple new technologies that are coming to change the world at the end of the day.
Dr. Ma Jun, the same question. What green technology do you consider the most important for the moment?
Yeah, we continue to track the amazing progress made on renewables. And I was invited to visit a solar company that developed the so-called perovskite solar panels, which can absorb a large amount of sunlight using an extremely thin layer. It means that it can be stacked upon top of the silicon cells for much higher efficiency. It also means that it can be painted on top of cars, surface of buildings, or even on sportswears. So the cost will be a lot more affordable.
Cost is very important. Now, let's move on from ambition to action, which was supposed to be the goal of the recent climate change summit in Belém, Brazil. Now, Ben, if I can go to you first. Now, COP30 in Brazil just came to a close, and we did see a lot of coalitions of nations deciding to work together on environmental problems and clean technologies. What do you read into that trend?
It's quite interesting, actually. It's quite promising to see a total of 80 countries come together and form a kind of sub-COP coalition, if you like, to talk about the phase out of fossil fuels. We think that that's a really interesting development. and something that really wasn't part of the conversation 2 years ago, and it's now front and center, which is really interesting and something that we often talk about. Sometimes the higher level agreements at a national level or at COP itself aren't clear. But if you look below that to what the cities are doing, to what the industry is planning, then often you can find really interesting points of progress and some fascinating markets to step into.
Yeah, Corinne, you know, a lot of people said it was a relatively weak COP in terms of the agreement. We also have the US recommitting to fossil fuels under Trump. We have Canada also rolling back on climate commitments to allow more oil and gas production. Who do you think is going to lead the next wave of green growth?
I confirm that we have some move back to the fossil energies, and but I would say that it will not be led by a single actor. The first one is the innovation hub. This is where, from where we will bring some new solutions on the market, which will be cheaper, easier to implement, using less raw materials, being recyclable. This innovation part is super important.
Now, thanks for that, Corinne. Now, I'll ask the same question to our guest here in Shanghai, China. Professor Wu, what do you think? Who do you think will lead the next wave of green growth?
I echo very strongly what Corinne just said. I think I wouldn't say China will be the only country to lead next green transition. Rather, I do see China, Europe, US, as well as many other developing countries really coming together. China has its own strength in terms of scaling, in terms of the pace, in terms of affordability, driving down the cost, industrial capability there. And together we'll be able to really put in all the resources, expertise, capability together to lead the next round of green transition.
That's interesting. I want to put a question to Marjun about this. We think it's easy to kind of forget the big picture. The reason we're doing this is to reduce carbon emissions. China has pledged to cut carbon emissions by 7 to 10% from peak levels by 2035, which is its first absolute reduction target. Do you think that's enough?
For a country with 1.4 billion people, this is not easy because it's still going through that massive industrialization and urbanization, and this energy and economic transition, social economic transition is not easy. If this target can be achieved, it will bring the single biggest reduction over the next 10 years globally. I think this absolutely, is important to the global climate governance.
Could you explain to me a little bit about how those targets are set? What's the thinking inside China and about the numbers? How do you arrive at those percentages?
Of course, to set this target, Chinese government have assembled a whole group of experts from all different kind of ministries and industries to try to do their research, of course, based on all the baseline and accounting and modeling. I think in China, all the stakeholders will make their efforts to try to bend the curve faster.
Let me turn to our guest in Europe, Corinne. If I can ask you about this, the digital economy is a key engine for a sustainable future. In areas such as artificial intelligence for smart grids, digitalization of industries, and green fintech, will we see more cooperation or more fragmentation between China and Europe? What do you think?
So first, I think that clearly indeed the digital economy is a key engine for sustainable future, is and will be more and more a key engine. I think that it's a factor for more cooperation, not more fragmentation, more cooperation, because at the end of the day, it's everybody is winning with the digitalization and artificial intelligence, because we are able to create, I would say, leaner, more efficient and lower energy production systems. So at the end, we are all winning with this kind of new tools.
question for Professor Wu. You know, there is a kind of tension in innovation between developing homegrown intellectual property and then collaborating across borders to grow new technology. What would you say are the biggest barriers to collaboration between countries on green tech? Is it, as we were just saying, a lot of it kind of to do with what's in the minds of people rather than the reality on the ground? What's your take?
Unfortunately, we do face a lot of barriers when green technologies actually are concerned today. One is a trust issue. We do not trust each other that much these days. That has become a major barrier. Now, in order to cooperate, actually, so we're in many cases we're not really in a sync or in the same step actually with each other. That's challenging. Now, in terms of standards, I think that there's this sort of fragmentation actually we face all over the place these days. If we do not address the trust issue, and if we continue to let geopolitical saga interrupting everything actually today, we know for sure, even though we have technologies these days to address climate change, to advance or accelerate a green transition or clean energy transition, somehow we wouldn't be able to achieve that because we wouldn't be able to get to the scale, get to the pace that's needed to do so. So that's pretty much the harsh reality we're living in.
Yeah, we do need to harmonize standards and protocols and coordinate policies in order to lower those barriers of cooperation between China and Europe. Mr. Ma Jun, let me ask you, can you give us some examples of digitalization actually making a difference for the better, of course, and to helping to drive down emissions, or at least to stabilize emissions?
Over the past 12 years, we have witnessed how digitalization helped to cut China's air and water emission and enhance the quality of the environment. China initiated the Clean Air Action Plan and then Clean Water Action Plan. It's all started from massive monitoring and disclosure. With all this monitoring, tens of thousands of monitoring stations which reported sulfur and PM 2.5 and ozone every hour. And then with all these tens of thousands of automatic monitoring installed on the smokestacks of the factories, which help them to report it to the public about their air emission every hour as well. This allows a digital solution to be developed to track the performance of regions, industries, and factories, and also create a real accountability based on the multi-stakeholder governance, through public oversight and government enforcement, and also market-based solutions like green supply chain and green finance. The efficiency is much, much higher.
That's very interesting. Let me come to Ben, because climate scientists tell us we need to have a 5% drop in emissions every year if we want to stabilize global warming. China is still a huge emitter, but its emissions seem to be flat, or they're falling now. What's behind that? What do you read into that from your point of view, Ben?
Yeah, I think, first of all, a massive congratulations to China. That's been a heavy lift, and the first step is always the hardest. So I read a quite promising signal into that, and I think it's a very interesting market signal towards Europe that China is well planned and well committed to its decarbonisation journey. And in there is a lot of market opportunity. There's we always say, where there's emissions, there's opportunities, and I think that that's a big signal for big business in Europe and for European politicians that the game is afoot. Decarbonisation is the future. It's time to get moving faster, and in some ways it's a race, but it's a positive race because it's one where everybody wins. We get clean air, cheap electricity, better quality food. It sounds like quite a nice kind of future scenario to me. So I'm quite pleased with that achievement. I think it's excellent, and really looking forward to how that can increase and ratchet over time so that we can blow past the 5% reduction and start to talk about 15, 20% year over year reductions. That's when things get really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, we come back to you about what you're talking about, unicorns, the fact that we have this kind of tendency to focus on one particular technology. But we've already kind of at the beginning highlighted a few. Are there some that you really think have a great deal of potential that we should spend a lot of time concentrating on and investing in now because they are ready to go and will really make a difference?
I would kind of more interestingly these days talk about the role of artificial intelligence in decarbonising some really tricky industrial processes. I think that that's where we can potentially find some really interesting breakthrough options in the next year or two. We have a really interesting change in the way that we can solve problems and the way that we can set about experimenting as well in digital twin models. So I'm quite interested and would like more people to be looking at AI, not so much in the chatbot sense, but very much in the sense of how can we use AI for experimentation in industrial processes like nitrogen fixing or energy production? How do we use it for biomedical processes? And how can we use it to optimize our food and fiber systems? There's a lot of really complicated real world challenges that are wrapped up in decarbonisation that I think applied AI is really very interesting for finding some breakthrough solutions. So that's what I would like the conversation to shift towards, a little bit less about solar panels and unicorns and a little bit more how do we get into these deep tech industrial processes.
Now, Professor Wu, I'm curious to know if you think there are emerging European technologies that you believe China should embrace and adopt more often and more widely.
I've been looking into some key areas, dimensions there. The firstly, actually, is really about industrial efficiency, deeper industrial efficiency. Europe definitely has been leading that. If you look at the energy perspective, integrated, smart grid integration and flexibility systems in Europe, actually, they are very good at a distributed model. The third dimension is really about circularity and the material science there. So then if you look at hydrogen, Europe definitely has been leading breakthroughs in terms of green hydrogen. So those are probably around the climate mitigation, energy transition perspective. Now coming on board actually is also the other side about adaptation, resilience there. Now, particularly China has submitted its first adaptation action plan to its NDCs to COP30. And so now we have a plan we need to deploy to make sure we have technology solutions there. In that area, I do think China, EU share a lot. So China can learn more from Europe from that perspective.
Thank you for that. That's very interesting. I mean, what's going through my mind, though, as I listen to you, is that we're going to need a lot of power. We're going to need a lot of energy. Corinne, can I come to you? Where's the energy going to come from?
I would say let's do the link with the geopolitical topics. If you look at the geopolitical topics, at the end of the day, it's about raw materials. And so my view is that we have to create some new way of producing energy that not consume too much raw materials, recycling, for example, or that consume raw materials that are well spread all over the world. And that will avoid a lot of problems. So there is no one magic solution for everybody everywhere. Once again, I think that it's about a mix with a strong focus on the end of the chain, which is to how we recycle the products. But today, my view is that if we bet on way of producing that are not using to concentrated raw materials, we will have the key for the future.
Thanks so much for sharing, Corinne. Now, Mr. Ma, let me ask you about fossil fuels, because it has been around with us and they probably will be in the foreseeable future. We just saw with COP30 in Brazil how difficult it is just to reach consensus on moving away from fossil fuels entirely. So how would you characterize China's path, which is unique, to decarbonization today?
At COP30, in Berlin, I also, personally witnessed how difficult it is. I think the failure, partially at least, can be anticipated, can be expected, because from COP29 to COP30, there's not enough discussion about the commitment. The world come together to agree with that. But unfortunately, there was not enough discussion about how to actually implement that. But among all the countries, China stood out, with this massive investment and deployment on the renewable energy. I mean, that is absolutely mind-boggling. China achieved the 2030 target on renewables last year, 6 years earlier. And along with this renewable energy transition, it's China's also spared no efforts on electrification. China's electrifying its economy 9 times faster than the rest of the world. So this combination of energy transition plus electrification, set a clear path, not just toward carbon picking, but carbon neutrality.
Can I ask you about, I mean, we've talked a lot about how China's achieved things, but how do you see the way that we're governing shared challenges, the way that we're managing things here in Europe? What's the kind of perspective from China on the European governance of how we're trying to roll out these green technologies in the way that you're talking about? What's the view from Beijing?
I absolutely agree with all the rest of the distinguished guests. Repeated this term of collaboration and working together. So I think, both EU and China, they have the ambition to be global leaders to deal with climate change. And both have the capacity and resources and innovative power. As the guest all mentioned, each have its own advantage. EU also have a lot of advantages. And as Changhua mentioned, on the circular economy side, on the recycling side, we have so much to learn from EU. But on the renewable side, now, over the past 10 years, China gradually, developed some more innovative solutions. So if the two can really come to work together, I think that will be a blessing, not just to our two sides, but also it will be a blessing to the entire world, particularly to those least developed countries.
Thanks for these clarifications. Professor Wu, do you think China and Europe can find immediate common ground on things like rare earth and critical raw materials and show that effective global governance is actually possible?
The short answer is absolutely yes. I think partly, as Corinne mentioned, this is one of the areas EU, China already been working together, but somehow we do have some hurdles, challenges that we need to figure out how to remove or lower the hurdles in order to achieve the scaling or accelerate it to actually transition there. On the rare earth issues, I think there are a few ways of looking at this particular issue. The first, we all expect to have predictability, and we do need to have the security. We have to make sure they are produced responsibly there as well. So from that perspective, actually, I think we do need to understand, we share the vulnerability. The second point I want to emphasize is that I think it's all understood really, really well. Cooperation is much cheaper, actually, than confrontation, particularly from the rare earth perspective. If we actually go alone, let me put it that way, if we go alone, actually, we all know the costs rise. The barriers started to rise, and basically the transition will be slow, much, much slower, and also geopolitical part actually will be much deeper. And that's not the scenario we want to, all get into. The third point I do want to emphasize, I think rare earth probably offers one of the best opportunity or test bed to see how the two largest economies in the world can really work together, joining up forces to continue to lead global clean energy transition to fight climate change. The two sides already taking steps. And that's where I think this global governance comes in. And so we already have the foundation. Somehow we need to further opening up to each other and trying to figure out actually how to invest in global governance to make sure really accelerating global clean energy transition.
Thanks very much for that. And we're going to wrap things up soon, but I just wanted to come with a final question to everybody. Maybe I can come to Corinne first. We talked a lot about who will lead and where. What's one change that you'd make now to accelerate the deployment of green technologies?
To accelerate the deployment, it's to create the fair conditions of market. If we cooperate, there is room for everybody. And that's the point. In all the discussion we had on the artificial intelligence, raw materials, recycling, everything is linked to a proper cooperation and a well-balanced cooperation. So my point is, let's not focus on what is not going well. Let's focus on what is going well. We are totally able to cooperate. We are industrial. We are not doing politics. And so that's probably the key to succeed on the ground. Let's work all together and we will change the world.
Together we will change the world. On that note, let me ask you, Mr. Ma, what is one change you would like to see happening to accelerate the green transition?
I think we need to focus on those solutions that give values. That's the other side of the coin. We should not just try to, only set all these targets with all this, troubling global climate governance. Only setting those ambitious targets is not enough. We need to tap into the technologies, AI and renewable, and all this, and try to create real good solutions.
Professor Wu, can we come to you with the same question about a change you'd make now to accelerate the deployment of green technologies?
Sure, thanks, Jeremy. I like both Corinne and Marjin's point, but in the meantime, I would like to go further to the root cause. The one thing I would like to see change is literally to fix the trust infrastructure. Fundamentally, if we do not manage to address that, all the aspirations we have on the table, or the targets, the commitments, wouldn't be able to be delivered very successfully. So I will go for fix the trust infrastructure.
Now, Ben, you had the final word.
Yeah, I agree. It's very important that we work on the governance and trust relationship all around the world. And I think that's very interesting change that's possible in the very near future as data infrastructure comes online and the advent of artificial intelligence makes collaboration easier. So I would certainly echo that if I could change one thing, it would be the way that we choose to trust one another and the way that we choose to collaborate with each other. I think that could be a really significant shift in accelerating the clean transition, but more importantly, creating a nice future for us all to live in and enjoy.
Now, on that note, I want to thank everyone for an insightful discussion on the practical pathways for China-EU cooperation on green growth. There's clearly a lot of potential ahead to create a more sustainable future for our planet, a more synergy between China and Europe. My thanks to our media partner Euronews, to Jeremy, and to our guests.
Thank you, Guan. I think we've highlighted many shared interests, you're totally right, and shared challenges ahead. Thanks also to CGTN and to our guests. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, and see you soon.